Greetings, everyone. My name's Christian Barker, and this is my ongoing series, Banter with Barker. And today, I'm kind of nervous actually. The gentleman I'm speaking with today is rather a hero to anyone who dares call himself a men's style writer. A gentleman by the name of Alan Flusser, who is joining us right this moment, live from New York. It's 9:30 in the morning, 9:30 p.m. here in Singapore. Alan's joining us right now. Fingers crossed. In case of any technical difficulties, we hope that Alan will be on the line in just one moment. There he is. Alan, it's a delight to be speaking to you face to face for the first time.
That's true. Now I know what you look like.
Exactly. Well, I've been looking at photographs of you for many years, since I was a mere gleam there we are. But look, thank you so much for sparing the time to chat with me today.
Of course, my pleasure.
The pleasure is.
It's a crazy day in New York. We have a tornado watch in Manhattan, if you can imagine that.
Really?
Yeah, there's a hurricane going up the east coast of the States, and it's set to park some of itself in and around the city today. So.
Okay, they say you reap the whirlwind. So perhaps that's what's happening. I guess, we didn't need any more disasters to afflict us, but one more can't hurt.
Right. Well, this one, no pun intended, we can weather. The others
yes.
are another story.
Indeed. See, that kind of wordplay is why you make the big bucks as a writer. That's what I always say. That's why I always say, well, let's begin by, it's going to come up backwards here, but talking a little bit about your latest coffee table book, Ralph Lauren, in his own fashion, which you and I have already had a little conversation about. I wrote a story for The Rake a little while ago, which anyone who's interested can look that up on therake.com. But how have things been going since the book's released late last year?
Well, it was released a little bit late in the fall, closer to late October. So there was a great opening party at the mansion, at Ralph Lauren's 72nd Street.
The Rhinelander.
The Rhinelander. And Ralph was there, and a couple hundred people showed up, and it was very successful and fun. And then I did a couple of personal appearances in various cities at Ralph Lauren's stores. However, the plan was to return after the new year, do more, and then of course everybody knows what happened with COVID. In the meantime, however, the book is in its second printing, or was in its second printing as of January, or even January, or December or January, and so its sales are at the last time I checked, which was literally before COVID, because there's nobody to really discuss it with. The sales, had approached about 20,000, which is a good start.
Yep.
And the future of the book, long term, I think revolves around the worldwide sales generated within, and somewhat without, but mostly within the Ralph Lauren world, where he will have the book sequestered in all of his stores and outlets, etc. So, being that most of those have been shut down, and the book store in the United States, for the most part, have been shut down, the only activity that could occur in terms of sales is, on the internet. And, I continue to do some interviews about the book. So that's pretty, I think that's pretty much next week or so, I will reach out to Abrams, its publisher, and get a kind of an update as to what is happening. I was discussing with them the possibility of creating a more luxury edition of the book.
Okay.
But of course, all of those kinds of conversations just simply fell by the wayside with the pandemic.
Everything has. We've suffered a lot of disruption and interruption, and not that good disruption that everyone talks about in the tech world. Everything's a little bit on hold. But you know, as we discussed and obviously for anyone who's joining this conversation or watching back on the recording and happens not to be familiar with Alan, is, you know, a legendary tailor, arbiter of style and fashion and menswear designer who has designed for many cult films such as Wall Street, American Psycho, Barbarians at the Gate, etc., but is also the author of several absolutely seminal menswear instructional how-to, well, you know, really Bibles of how to dress as a classically elegant gentleman. Books called Style and the Man, Clothes and the Man, and Dressing the Man. And I wanted to show you, Alan, you know, this, I think, is what most menswear writers' copies of your books look like. You know, they're heavy with all sorts of bookmarks for those various reference points. And you know, I think it's not simply myself, but virtually any men's style writer who applies the more classic side of things has a great debt to you. But you know what I wanted to come to in all of that digression and rambling was the fact that the new book, your latest book, despite it not being a explicitly an instructional book, still remains an incredibly you know, inspiring and educational title. And I know that you set out to do that.
How? First of all, you're very generous. Thank you very much. What is your impression of the book? I mean, as an aficionado of the subject matter.
Well, look, as someone who absolutely loves Ralph Lauren, and I think I've probably paid at least half of his children's university tuitions myself. Though I'm sure there's tens of thousands of people out there who would say the same thing. You know, he's an incredibly inspiring individual, and just, you know, as we have discussed in the past, throws things together in a way that few others would think of. But I think you are one of those few others. You know, and you're renowned for putting things together in a particularly, you know, in a very Alan Flusser way, in the same way that Ralph Lauren puts things together in a very Ralph kind of way. So no, obviously, I think the book is an incredible, you know, monograph of Mr. Lauren and what he's done through a long and distinguished career, but also, you know, you can look at looks in there from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000 zeros, and 2000 teens, whatever, right up until now, and finds incredible amounts of inspiration and great ideas to steal.
Right. I mean, I of course wrote the book because I didn't think there was a book that was really deserving of what Ralph had accomplished. But I also, you know, took the opportunity to use Ralph as a jumping off point to try and inform, or better inform, people's ideas of what, you know, long-term style looks like, or personal elegance, you know, might be shaped by, and you know, I hope that it you know, that it resonates on several levels. One obviously being informative about Ralph, and you know, and which looks into the mind of a person whose philosophy about fashion and style is something that I think is probably the most important message that young people need to know, meaning that, you know, fashion is something that's transitional, subject to change, fickle, and all the rest of those adjectives, whereas style is something that, you know, you evolve over a period of time and is more long lasting.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in the book, from the philosophies of Yves Saint Laurent to Coco Chanel, if you look at what they have expressed about that subject, it will mirror, or it will connect well with how Ralph, you know, has approached designing and almost every part of his life. But the other part is, you know, like Dressing the Man or my other books, people can open up that book at almost any point, and hopefully the taste of what they see is something that provides them with, you know, a reference of what, at least, you know, what high class taste is supposed to look like, or could look like, let's say. And you know, we have very few examples in the culture as to what, you know, constitutes long-term, not only personal style, but, you know, long-term fashion, or a way of putting clothes together that transcends the moment. And so I hope that in the years to come, people will look at it, you know, as another kind of point of reference with regards to pretty long 50 years in Ralph's case, being, you know, trying to imagine someone who has done fashion collections for 50 plus years.
That's incredible.
It's inconceivable to really process something as gargantuan as that. And of course, with the pressure of having to stay on top of, you know, be a leader in one capacity or another. It's an amazing accomplishment. But as I said, you know, Ralph put together his own book, that gigantic pictorial book.
Yeah.
And as I said in my book, there were photographs from all different eras in Ralph's life, juxtaposed next to each other without any identification as to the year. Because Ralph felt that almost any of his, you know, photographs or looks had no real time frame and could, you know, could hold their own next to anything that had been done more recently.
Certainly.
And for the most part, that's, you know, that is the case. So anyway, I hope it's another grounding in what you know, kind of high class taste looks like, or could look like, you know, going forward.
I certainly think you've added to the canon, Alan. Absolutely, it's an excellent addition. But you know, I think an area where you and Mr. Lauren parallel one another is, as I said a little earlier, is in putting things together in a surprising way, or in a way that others might not immediately think of. And I know that you know, in the past, perhaps more than Ralph Lauren, you yourself have probably been criticized by people for doing something like wearing a pair of Belgian slippers in an unexpected way, or throwing on a pair of tracksuit pants with tailored garments, which is now considered, you know, a very conventional thing to do, but perhaps that wasn't the case 20 or more years ago.
I got criticized for it as recently as in the fall, at a forum that who's the fellow from Permanent Style?
Simon.
Chris. Who?
Simon Crompton.
Yeah, Simon. And Simon yeah, I showed up in one of my sport jackets and yeah, athletic bottoms and a shirt and tie. And I don't really, I'm not, I mean, I read some, like the guys here will direct me to, read certain blogs and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but, and I become friendly with Simon, but he said, so I put this up, in front of everybody. And he said, you have to look at the comments on the, the forum, because it had a lot of interesting people. And at least the first 15 or whatever were expressed some variation of outrage
Yeah.
on seeing, the author of Dressing the Man, outfitted in such a incomprehensibly eclectic, well, that would have been complimentary manner. And it was just interesting to see people's reaction, which is to your point.
Yeah.
But both, Ralph, I think that Ralph's, one of his major contributions to the world of style in general is trying to teach people how to put clothes together. And if you live in New York City, as an example, which is probably the heartbeat of, kind of dressing by putting different genres of clothes, juxtaposing different genres of clothes together. So downtown and preppy, or vintage, and designer, or whatever it is. I mean, that's what's been drove street fashion for many, many years. So, but to someone who doesn't have the kind of confidence or experience to take clothes and manipulate them in in a workable manner, it seems, and it's the most difficult thing to teach somebody how to dress in a, in an eclectic or individual manner. Easier, of course, just like, it's easier for a man to put a suit, shirt, and tie on and look reasonably well dressed than it is to ask him to do the same thing with sportswear. All of a sudden now you're dealing with different items and putting them together and stuff like that. But as most people who are real fashion insiders know, those people who know how to mix metaphors in terms of clothes, know how to mix different kinds of clothes. And in Ralph's case, of course, he has double RL Western clothes to be able to put with purple label, to be able to put with polo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He has that format. And of course, ultimately, once you get down certain fundamentals about your own dressing style, the interest is, of course, how to take all these classic things and mix them together in an interesting way. And as I said, there's a picture of Ralph in Paris. He's at least in his 70s, and he's wearing one of his typically eclectic outfits of, like, a white shirt and a black tie and a motorcycle jacket, jeans, and some really outrageous Western boots, And as I said, nobody would appreciate the creativity of how a guy might get dressed more than the French. But, that's been Ralph's message for many, many years. And, the idea that this guy built, the kind of business he built based on the idea of one should have an arm's length relationship with fashion is really, is always something that I felt was needed to be, better understood by people around the world, because in that message is contained, to a certain degree, what we're talking about, which is basically learning how to dress that has possibly some connection to fashion, but then again, not really any at all. And the most well-dressed people in the world, whether they even dress, and more traditionally, like in suits and ties or something other, have always dressed for themselves first, and if others, caught on, then they caught on. So Ralph has, demonstrated that for many years, and it's my own, personal philosophy as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's remarkable that you yourself are a haberdasher, men's outfitter, and fashion designer, and yet, we keep having these conversations where you're the biggest proponent and promoter of Ralph Lauren that I've ever come in contact with, which I think is yeah.
Well, I'm a small time, in terms of my reach. My books, of course, have certainly broadened, my ability to communicate to people. But I can't really imagine what the fashion world or life, for people who love clothes would be without Ralph. It just, you would have Calvin Klein and Armani, at least in this country. Nothing wrong necessarily with either of them, but when you think, it's very hard to totally comprehend how Ralph's vision has inculcated so many people, to a certain idea of, that, clothes should be something that give you some longevity and permanence in a sense. And, no, it's that. I mean, when I first started my custom business, people would say, well, if you're going to make clothes for like 20 or 30 years, that doesn't sound like a great business plan, because if your clothes don't wear out, why should people, who's going to come back and buy more? I said, first of all, I wouldn't be interested in making clothes that people couldn't wear for a long time as a general proposition. But secondly, most men are way past the notion of what they actually need and buy things because they enjoy wearing them and they can visualize, what kind of addition they make to their wardrobe. And so, and Ralph's, idea is the same in a sense. But here's a guy who built, $1 billion, business around the idea of style and not fashion. And would have seemed when it started to be a very uncommercial approach to, building any kind of a multinational, company. And so, yeah, I think that Ralph's, that the philosophy that he, that the company has espoused and what it represents is the most important, philosophy for people to understand in terms of getting ready to either build a wardrobe or just, what they need to know in terms of aspiring to dress well. And, and I just, I don't think that anyone has been able to articulate that in such a way, like I would, approach it. And, we have differences between us, but, the vast majority of what connects us is overwhelmingly over what might not connect us. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about. Obviously, everything at the moment is viewed through the lens of COVID-19 and this crisis that the world is going through. And the last time that you and I had the opportunity to chat was in the pre-COVID world, and kind of the whole landscape has shifted, and many ecosystems have been thrown out of whack by this whole thing. Obviously, you've just come back to work. I gather, maybe a month ago or thereabouts.
Right.
How has, and I know looking at the figures that just sort of sales of apparel across the board, I think, the numbers for April 2020 were 80% less than April 2019, which is just, shocking. So apparel,
Well,
people.
how much less, Christian? How much?
79, I think it was 79 year on year, down.
Right.
It was the
Well,
United States figures. That's what I read, which
sure.
is
Well,
huge,
at that
huge.
point, every single business was closed.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's, you're talking about online sales for the most part. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, you've still got
Right.
e-commerce, but um,
Right.
you
Right.
know, how have you found that the situation has affected you? And I would imagine that many of your customers are, you know, they're men who are very passionate about clothes, and as you say, they're not buying things because they need them. They're buying things because they love to dress well, and they you know, get real pleasure out
Right.
of buying new beautiful clothes and creating new more interesting looks out of their existing wardrobe by adding new things. Um,
Right.
has consumption changed at all, or have, you know, the customers who are now coming back to see you once again, is what they're consuming changing? And I'm also curious to know, have they said to you, "Gee, Alan, I really missed getting dressed up every day. You know, when I was, you know, these guys who are used to getting dressed for the office and have been working from home for maybe 90 days, or maybe they're still working from home. Are they remarking that they've really missed putting on that suit in the morning?"
Well, okay. A few questions contained within there.
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
say, as a general rule, of course, we have a kind of a hardline, sartorially um, focused clientele. So I'm not sure it's representative of, you know, population in general. And of course, we have people who still bemoan the fact of, you know, the people who work for them, you know, dressing down in, you know, sportswear and stuff, and they who spent their, you know, 30 years of their career trying to earn enough money to dress, you know, like from Savile Row and dress like their superiors dressed. But
certainly.
having said that, you know, the I mean, the circumstances, the retail circumstances in this country, and I'm sure around the world, but particularly in this country, because COVID is totally out of control around this country, um, is such that it is compromising the ability of either small retailers, and in this case large retailers, to survive. There is. We've already had Brooks Brothers.
Yeah.
Yesterday it was Lord and Taylor's and another big clothing retailer, Neiman Marcus and Bergdorf's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, if it continues as it is in the United States, probably getting worse in the fall, because in the fall, you know, comes a season where you tend to have colds and things like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And this maniac, you know, who's running, or supposedly running the country, and then you have the election coming up, which will be distracting. People's focus with regards to buying clothes is certainly distracted, you know, in the max, and people's fear of being safe is also, you know, still. Although in New York it's a little better because we've done a very good job, you know, of dealing with the virus. But most of the well-to-do people, most of the customers of the custom shop, my custom shop, are still out in the Hamptons, not planning to come back into New York anytime soon. Waiting to see what happens in the fall. A lot of them have children.
Yeah.
The children are going to be taken out of, you know, the private schools that they are in New York, who are not going to go back to, you know, teaching at school, but online.
Mm.
and put them in different schools, let's say out in the Hamptons or Connecticut or wherever they are. And a lot of them can continue to operate, out of the office. So, we wrote a letter as an example to our customers and said, look, we're 35 years old. We've got a great run. We'd love to continue. And if you want us to be in a position to be able to make you clothes in the future, we're going to need you to step up now to support the business. Otherwise, there can't be any business. And we've had a very kind of a reassuring, so to speak, response from people.
That's great.
And the question, that's been wonderful. And but the question is, how long can something like that sustain you if the circumstances for working and the circumstances for purchasing or buying are such that people are afraid, to take chances and don't want to take chances. So,
and you mean taking chances by coming in to see you in person in the city for their fittings and so forth?
Yeah, just getting here, whether you're going to take an Uber or whether you're going to take a taxi or whether you have a private car or, just going out of your building, interacting with whoever is living, who's working in the building, going into, in our case, it's not a big, place, like a big building where there are elevator operators and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
For people who don't have to take those chances, they're not going to. And even though New York, Manhattan is probably one of the safer places, is the safest place probably in the country. The streets are still absolutely vacant with people, etc. I mean, when I come from my apartment downtown, which usually takes 25 minutes, I get here in 10 minutes every day.
Wow.
And I literally go from my apartment, take an Uber, who now have like dividers between you and the driver.
Yeah.
I come down here, I go to my office, I'm in my office, I take the Uber back to my apartment, and that's it. And then I go out to Long Island where, we're spending a lot of time. So, that kind of lifestyle does not breed consumerism. And I'm afraid, having been in the business for as long as I've been in it, that this pandemic is, it's disruptive on a level that no one has ever experienced before.
Agreed.
And the biggest problem at the moment is, what do parents do in terms of having their kids go back to school? And whether you're, money is no object and you're discussing whether they're going back to their, private school or not, or whether your kids are in public school, the government has not provided the public or society at large with the resources to help make the schools safe. So in addition to it spiraling out of control in a lot of the Republican-led states, in the South, Florida, wherever, and so therefore it's clearly not safe. The teachers, understandably, are very reluctant to expose themselves to. So the point is, if kids don't go to school, parents don't go to work, or parents are trying to figure out how to stay home to organize the kids' activities, and then you have the election. So I think you're going to see, unfortunately, a drove of closings of stores. If you go up Madison Avenue, you'll see, there were stores already closed before the pandemic, but there's, the amount of just retail spaces for rent or sale is
staggering,
unprecedented. So, I don't know how, it's all shakes down in a place like Singapore. But
Well, I can tell you, I went to the Central Business District for the first time in quite some time, probably a couple of months, to pick up some post from the co-working space office that I normally use there, but have not been. I've been working from home for several months now, and it was shocking to me to see the number of. It wasn't so much. I mean, there's already the garment retail has already been suffering terribly, I think, but I just saw countless formerly absolutely rammed, dining establishments, restaurants, whether that's restaurants or,
Right.
Thai food places or sushi joints,
Sure.
whatever, that were just gone. So yeah, it was palpable, the
Right.
damage that's being done.
Even in New York City, restaurants are not open. In some cases, they've allowed you to put some chairs and tables out on the street in front of the restaurant, but you can't go inside. So, this we had, a president and an administration who were capable of handling an emergency, and who were interested in the welfare of the people, as opposed to their own perpetuation and ultimate, election. Most people felt, okay, we're prepared to, shut down for March, April, May, even June, after which, there's a return to some normality. But since this guy, for whatever reasons, has, ended up confusing most people, and it's a patchwork approach to, to dealing with the pandemic, the country is, in the midst, the wealthiest, most powerful country in the world is in the midst of a runaway pandemic.
I tell you, we outside the United States look in, and
yeah,
it's baffling and flabbergasting, and yeah. But look, we could go on about Mr. Trump all night. I try not to, and it gets me a little bit too upset and heated up. But I'd rather your customers, or the type of gentleman that you cater to. Do you think they're schlubbing around their home in an old Michigan T-shirt and a pair of tracksuit pants and some Adidas slides, or are they still taking joy and a little bit of a psychological lift from dressing nicely, even while around the home?
I would say the former.
Really?
The problem is that most people say, I haven't put on a pair of trousers. Well, of course, it's the summer. I haven't put a pair of trousers on in 4 months. I've been living in a T-shirt. The problem is, even if you wanted to put on a sport jacket, where would you go? There were no restaurants open. There's no places to go with a sport jacket on, unless you're having a more recent interaction with another couple, social distancing, and you want to put on a jacket for something like that. That might be one of the rare, because there's no gathering. So the point is, as much as somebody wants to dress up or put on clothes that they would like to wear, they have no place to generally wear them, which is a very bizarre. I mean, when we had the financial meltdown in 2008, okay, so people lost a lot of money, but business was open to be done. There are places to go. You could go to restaurants or whatever. No restaurants, no places to go. So most people who I've spoken to have said, and this is one of my greatest fears. In addition, my experience in the 2008 financial meltdown, was once people buying cycles to a certain degree get interrupted, and interrupted for a long time, it's very slow for them to get back on the horse, so to speak, and start to spend money in the manner in which they were. And in this particular case, having to be sequestered at home, I mean, most people have focused on, buying that kind of clothing that allows them to relax as elegantly or as comfortably as they can, because most men don't own probably enough clothes to wear around a house, even to do business in. So,
but I mean, I'm reading that employees or the rank and file or whatever are now seeing their superiors, their bosses, their managers on these group Zoom telephone calls and whatnot, and the boss
right.
is there wearing a schlubby old grey mile t-shirt, and the staff are not getting that same sense of authority out of their boss that they were when they would see him or her wearing something a little bit sharper. And I just find, look, I'm the first to admit I've done about 40 of these interviews now, and I'm generally wearing a pair of shorts. I'm doing it newsreader style, but you put on a proper collared shirt and a jacket, and it just, it's been proven for the whole time that we've had television that this adds a certain gravitas to your appearance.
Without a doubt. But you have to understand that, the only fashion that has been continuous and kind of ineluctable is the casualization of dress. That's been going on uninterrupted for a long, long time. You look at the 80s, you look at the 90s, you look at, the turn of the century, you'll find a greater expression of casual clothes as you go along. And that's a very seductive proposition for a man, to offer him the opportunity to work or do anything in something more comfortable. And once you spend enough time in clothes that are just simply about comfort or action, movement, the genie is kind of let out of the bottle. It's very hard for someone to go back. Not that they won't go back, but I remember when I worked for Pierre Cardin in the 70s, and he was talking about how the inevitability of how people wearing traditional workplace tailored clothes and stuff, and strapping a piece of silk around their neck and then knotting it up tight.
Yeah.
He said was, by the turn of the century, people are going to be in jumpsuits going to the moon. Now, of course, Pierre was a very, modernist person.
Yes.
But and of course, people don't like uniforms either. I mean, that kind of uniform. But the fact is that, you've had this mass casualization of, now showing up in a suit with an open neck shirt, right? No tie. Dress down, casual Fridays. And now work places that are less structured in terms of offices, but have a more open format where people move from place to place, and et cetera. And that breeds, when I was in Ralph Lauren's colossus of a building that they have 2 floors in, 3 floors down at the lower side. Everybody working there was in some form of jeans and t-shirt, whatever. And this is an apparel company, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many, forces at work against. As a matter of fact, I just wrote. One of the things I've been doing is doing a lot of writing on subjects that I've been putting aside. So I wrote an article on the future of the suit, and I just finished writing an article. I'll send it to you. I just actually finished writing an article which has not been published yet. I sent it to the New York Times about my impression or my recommendations vis-a-vis Brooks Brothers, who's also.
Can't wait to read that.
And, I've been asked for, years about my level of interest of getting involved in Brooks Brothers, because most people understood it's been deteriorating for years. for decades.
Mm.
And the first thing I would point out is that to date, no invitation had been forthcoming. But at the
Sure.
same time, because of my particular background in menswear, and also the fact that my father and my father's uncles and myself grew up at Brooks Brothers. My knowledge of Brooks Brothers, I even have a file of vintage, Brooks Brothers catalogs, pamphlets, etc. My knowledge
Really?
of Brooks Brothers, I probably know more about what Brooks Brothers looked like in the 60s, in its heyday, what kind of merchandise it had, et cetera, than anybody, et cetera. And so I finally, and of course I tell people who would inquire, I said, look, I have my businesses and I have my writing and they're keeping me pretty busy. So with no invitation and, being preoccupied, but now realizing that Brooks Brothers is yet up for sale and that this might be its last round, that it's either now or never. And since I'm not writing a book, so I decided that I would write what I think they need to focus on. And basically, in terms of creatively getting it back together again, if that's what they decide to do, they have the single most important archives, menswear archives in the world, which the company in the two last regimes have almost never set foot in. Never. And you can see that. Yeah, you can see that because the merchandise bears no representation of who Brooks was for the last 20 years, for anybody who really knows their way around Brooks. So when this last Italian fellow bought it, I called him to tell him that I don't know if you know, but you have this extraordinary archives in Washington, D.C., and you should at least be aware of it. Because most of the conversation is, some people who own malls and other getting together with a wholesaler and buying the brand and putting it in malls which need occupants, and it going down market and becoming something that competes in price with other products, etc. I mean, that's one scenario, and there's a couple scenarios like that. Of course, that would be the death knell of Brooks as anybody has ever known it, and I don't think it could survive that. So,
disaster.
Anyway, I wrote this. It's 2,400 words. It's a lot more than I expected, and I literally last night I just sent it to the Times, and I hope they'll publish it. If they don't, I'll send it to another periodical. But I mean, that's kind of how I've occupied my time, at least.
Well, there was Michael Williams of the blog A Continuous Lean. He wrote a very interesting similar thing a couple of weeks ago, an opinion piece on how but it was exactly the opposite of taking it down market and putting it in malls and making it super cheap. I would tend to agree that Brooks needs to become. Excuse me,
Christian. Who is that? Michael Williams.
Michael Williams. He has a blog called A Continuous Lean. It was quite the big thing around sort of 2008, 2010. I think he had not been concentrating so much on it lately, but has restarted during this quiet time, as so many of us have been able to put pen to paper. But yeah, very interesting and definitely worth a look.
How has your transition gone in terms of, starting a blog and now?
God, I don't know. This has all sort of been it's been a very disruptive period because, and that's why I describe a lot of what's happening as ecosystems being affected. In the same way, if you kill off the sharks, then the sucker fish dye as well, and you know, those little suckerfish that go along the side of the shark, keeping them clean and helping
Sure.
yes, live alongside them. So, you know, in the same way that travel has been affected and restaurants and, you know, the general luxury industry, whether that's clothing or watches, jewelry,
Sure.
whatever
Sure.
else, in much the same way, the people who write about those things have also found themselves with rather less work, and the publications
Sure.
that rely on advertising from all of those artisans or brands or whatever are also suffering. So, you know, the whole ecosystem is being stuffed over. You know, it's been lovely having more time to spend with my family and with my children. So got to look at the bright side.
How old are your kids?
My girls are 9 and 12. So yeah,
that's an important time. I have 2 daughters as well. They're older, but 9 and 12. I think you're still a hero. I'm not sure. Maybe you've evolved to a doofus on occasion. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
certainly.
You know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Look, absolutely. My eldest, who's 12, is beginning to think. Yeah, I'm definitely not the coolest dad around, but
12 going on 21.
Yeah. Hopefully she'll, you know, she says to me, "Oh my God, Daddy, why do you like Ralph Lauren? You know, Tommy Hilfiger is so much cooler." And I smack myself in the head. And what can you do? What can you do?
Right.
Now we had a question a little bit earlier from a gentleman named Miles Fisher, who's a very dapper chap and who was a successful entrepreneur and actor. And I'm going to be speaking with him in a couple of days' time. But he was asking, you know, and it was stemming from that, what we were saying about casualization. He was asking whether, Alan, you think that clubs like the Brook, Knickerbocker, Lynx, and so forth in New York will continue to require traditional dress. Miles was saying that going to supper there is the only occasion he'd ever wear a tie, basically now, and if they make ties no longer obligatory, then the world sort of falls apart. What do you think? Will even these very traditional institutions, you know, I know the Ritz in London now allows denim, which people were shocked by.
Well,
Claridge's
has, you know, allowed denim, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and actually outfits walking through the lobby that in a million years they would have never approved of. But you know, we were members of the Harmony Club, which is a kind of a Jewish club in New York, and they've, you know, kind of managed to try and carve out days, let's say, or evenings where younger people can get together, and it's not obligatory to wear a tie, but you have to wear a jacket, let's say. I think it's, I mean, that's an excellent question. I don't know how long the clubs can endure by requiring, you know, people guys to wear suits and ties. It's laudatory. It's not like I'm against that, but it seems inevitable that in trying to generate new members and attract new members, that the more opportunity you give them to take advantage of the facilities of a club, not dressed to the nines, is going to be, you know, in your favor. Yeah. I'm trying to remember the club down the block here, which is an expensive, you know, very upscale meeting place, very elegant, very stylish, where people can pretty much dress. And you have the Bill Gates of the worlds, and, you know, coming to hang out in that kind of place, and it's very busy. It's very successful financially. As far as, you know, the old world, old line clubs, you know, much like 21,
Mm.
you know, Club 21. They have, like 21 has, you know, knocked down the requirement for, you know, showing up in a suit and tie. I mean, I'd like to think that, you know, that if you showed up in something that was really spiritually, you know, at odds with the idea of you know, of appropriately dressed men, you know, gentlemen, that they would turn them away. But it's, you know, in this case, they probably just put him in the corner, you know, or put him in Siberia, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's a really good question. And on the other hand, you know, part of my suit, you know, piece was kind of like, okay, we're probably going to go through a period where, you know, people will be not wearing suits and shirts and ties in as regular a way as they did prior to COVID. And then, you know, some people will start showing up in suits and ties and spending more time doing so because it's a little bit so different.
Mm.
And, you know, and all of a sudden, I don't know, they'll come rushing back, but all of a sudden there'll be a new kind of appeal, a new kind of perspective about it. Because the main thing is that the jacket that you're wearing or that garment is the single most flattering article of apparel that's ever been designed.
Yeah.
And its longevity is assured. And of course, obviously, that's part of a suit. So women wear men's jackets, a man's jacket. Just learning how to wear a jacket, learning how to put it together, learning what are the parameters of from shorts to jeans to gray flannels,
yep,
from ties, turtlenecks, whatever. Knowing how to, you know, wear a tailored coat in all different ways. I mean, that's, you know, ultimately what, in my opinion, people should focus on with regards to, you know, moving forward. So there is that to protect, you know,
yep,
the wearing of tailored clothing, because designers have been attempting to denude, you know, that convention, you know, that design, and substitute all kinds of things for it, just like they have in black tie. And, you know, when push comes to shove, to your point, if you're just looking at somebody from the waist up, you know, wearing a jacket projects a certain amount of authority. And, you know, and it always will. And the question is, you know, again, that's part of, you know, the design community's mission, is to how to, in part, present tailored clothing to be interesting and appealing to a younger generation who, you know,
most certainly. Alan, I could keep talking to you all night, but Instagram cuts us off on these things,
okay.
or all day. And they're giving me a countdown saying we've got 1 minute and 21 seconds remaining. And honestly, there were 1,000 other things I wanted to ask you about, not least talking about Instagram, how the bosses of Facebook and Google and so forth turned themselves out to front up to the Senate last week. But look, I'd love to continue this conversation in private one of these days. But look, sure. I'm so grateful for you sparing the time to chat with me today, Alan. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. Alan Flusser, ladies and gentlemen, the man.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, and I will speak to you once again soon. Look forward to reading those stories.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. Take care.
You too.